Why do we do this at all if it's something that A, is unnecessary, and B, we know is going to potentially lead to negative consequences? Why in the world would we do this? Right? It seems like a no-brainer when you hear it at face value, but there's a lot of reasons why people may engage in procrastination. So, welcome to the Mindset Gym podcast, where we exercise your way of thinking to help unlock your hidden potential. I'm your host, Emily Irwin, a registered nurse and holistic nutritionist with a passion for all things health, fitness, and personal development. All right, let's get into it. Good morning and welcome back to the Mindset Gym podcast. I hope you're having a great start to your week. So today we are diving into a topic that I know a lot of you struggle with. I struggle with it. It's a very commonly talked about problem. What is it? Procrastination. Now I know your ears perked up because it's not just me that has an issue with this, okay? We are going to dive in today to what procrastination is, what are some elements that are causing it, and what are some strategies that we can take to help improve this in our day-to-day life and get things done in a little bit more of a timely manner, because I think we could all benefit from that. So, what is procrastination? Procrastination is the act of putting things off unnecessarily, even though you know that putting it off is going to potentially lead to negative consequences. So, hearing the definition of that, you may be asking yourself, why do we do this at all if it's something that A, is unnecessary, and B, we know is going to potentially lead to negative consequences? Why in the world would we do this? Right? It seems like a no-brainer when you hear it at face value, but there's a lot of reasons why people may engage in procrastination. So the first thing that can lead to procrastination is fear of failure. How does this lead to procrastination? So if there is something that we are afraid of, in this case, it's failing at any particular task that we're working on, our brain will help us go out of our way to avoid it. So let's put this in terms of an example. Let's say that you have a project due for school and you are afraid of looking like you don't know enough on the topic, or creating something that's bad, or getting a failing grade on this project. Your brain is going to try and avoid that uncomfortable feeling or avoid that potential failure. And the way that it's going to do this is it's going to try and avoid working on this project at all. Why? Well, because in our own twisted, logical way of thinking, if we don't finish this project at all, we can't fail at it, right? You can't reach that potential failure if you don't do the project in the first place. And so our brain, in order to try and protect us from that negative thing, is going to put it off and put it off and push it aside and try and get us to work on anything else that we don't fear potentially failing at. This approach of avoiding doing something because of fear of failure, it can also be used as kind of a form of self-preservation, because what ends up typically happening as a result is we will put it off and we'll put it off, and then finally at the last minute we are overwhelmed with this stress and anxiety and we have to rush through something at the very last minute. And because we've done that, it creates this kind of thing in our brain where if we do now fail, we kind of have an excuse of, oh well, I rushed through it at the last minute, so maybe that's why I didn't do as well as I thought I did. Had I started earlier, had I given myself more time, maybe I wouldn't have failed. And so it kind of gives us this way to soften the blow if the result is not what we want it to be. So the second thing that can drive procrastination is perfectionism. So on the flip side of not wanting to do something because you're afraid of failing, we can also put things off because we feel like we can't get it 100% perfectly right. And so this anxiety of us wanting to be 100% perfect and tick every box and dot every I and cross every T, it can drive us away from starting anything at all, because in order to reach this kind of perfectionist standard that you have created in your head, the amount of work to do this task and the amount of energy that is going to go into creating this final project can feel so unbelievably overwhelming and unachievable that it's easier to just not start at all. If you can't do it perfectly, why bother, is kind of the narrative that you end up telling yourself. And so we end up taking what might have been a much smaller task and making it feel like this giant mountain because we have created all these extra steps that we need to do in order to make it what we deem to be quote unquote perfect. And so, in order to avoid the stress of having to create this perfect masterpiece, we just don't do it at all. We just push it off and we avoid it. The third thing that can lead to procrastination is lack of motivation. Now, this is something we have talked about in another episode, and I have said it once and I will say it again. Motivation is garbage. It's a terrible, terrible thing to rely on, but it's oftentimes what people rely on. People want to feel that motivation. They want to feel that drive to get this task done. And if they don't have that really big sense of motivation, they don't really do it. And the problem with this is it means any kind of hard task that just requires a lot of discipline and a lot of you just putting your head down and getting it done even though you don't want to is not going to get accomplished. So what we've talked about before in the episode about motivation, our brains love instant gratification. We love that kind of short-term wins. What we don't love is working hard for gratification down the road that we do not immediately see. So that kind of long-term payoff is something that we have a much harder time doing. So in, let's say that the example we talked about before where we've got this really hard project for school to work on, the long-term gain of us showing up and doing the work and getting it done, that project is now off our plate. This is stress we don't have to worry about. However, if there are other things that are going to provide much shorter term gratification, whether it's going and watching something on Netflix or playing a video game or going out with friends or anything like that that just provides that much more instant boost of dopamine and gives you that sense of reward and payoff much quicker, is going to be the route that we want to take first. We are not going to want to pick this really hard long-term work over the short-term reward. Something that can contribute to procrastination, this kind of goes in the same vein as motivation, and it is task aversion. So if things are boring or difficult or unpleasant, this is something that our brain will just naturally try to avoid. And kind of similar to what I just talked about when it comes to motivation versus discipline and choosing what tasks to do, we live in a world with abundant distractions. So if there is something that is boring, unpleasant, or difficult that you don't want to do, cool, there's a million other things that you can pick to do instead of that. And so it becomes very easy for your brain to say, well, you know what? That looks hard. Here's a bunch of other easier things that I would rather do instead. And so it will push you to set that task aside and pick something else. And so the last thing that can contribute to procrastination is a lack of structure, deadlines, and planning. When we have a project with a path forward that is not really clear, we don't really have a structured way of working on it, we don't really have a set deadline, we don't really have a plan for what we're doing to move through it, it can make it really difficult to know where to start. You don't really have these clear stepping stones of, okay, day one, this is what I need to do, day two, this is what I need to do, and this is when I need to get these things done by. And so the amount of decisions and planning that need to go into this task can feel really overwhelming. And so instead of taking the time to try and figure all of those things out, our inclination is just to avoid the task altogether because it's confusing, it's too much work to sort out, and it can just feel too difficult to start when we don't have any sort of structure in place. And so something that can contribute to this is decision fatigue. And this is this notion that throughout the day, the more decisions that we make, the harder and harder it gets for us to make decisions. We kind of have this set bandwidth of things that we are easily able to make decisions on. And after time, that becomes a whole lot harder to do. So when you have something with very little structure in place, it requires a lot of decision making on your part. And so we can very easily start a project like this and get into decision fatigue and think, well, you know, F this is too much for me to plan. And so you just set it aside and you don't work on it at all. So now that we have a little bit of an understanding of things that can contribute to procrastination, what can we do to work on it? So here are some things that we can do to help overcome procrastination and get things done a little bit quicker. So the first one is a strategy that I actually use quite a bit, and it is to lie to yourself. Now, this is not typically advice that I would give in a lot of other aspects, but in this particular case, lie to yourself about due dates. I do this all the time. And so, back to our kind of school project example, let's say you are given a project on January 1st, and this project is technically due at the end of February. So you have 2 months to get this project done. What I would typically do is I would mentally tell myself this project is due at the end of January. And not only would I tell myself this, I would put it in my planner, put it in my phone reminders, put it in my calendar. Make it feel like this concrete thing that this project is due on January 31st instead of the end of February. Because shortening that deadline in your head, it adds that element of kind of urgency and anxiety that I think some of us need to push us to actually work on something. Because oftentimes what we'll do is we will put it off and we will put it off until that kind of, oh shit, this is due the next day kind of anxiety creeps in, and you quickly rush through things the night before. And so if we are able to kind of create that sense of urgency earlier on, it will push us to put in the work, because the discomfort of potentially missing a due date, of, the anxiety that you are running out of time, becomes more uncomfortable than the discomfort of you actually just tackling this project. So the second thing that we can do to help with procrastination is to find small ways to reward yourself along the way. So like we talked about before, our brains love instant gratification. And so any sort of short-term gain that we can get is going to feel much more appealing than that long-term stress and work for the long-term payoff. And so what we can do to kind of leverage this is finding small ways to bring that kind of instant gratification into the work that we are trying to do. And so this may look like, for every 20 minutes of work, I am going to go listen to this podcast that I really like, or I'm going to go spend some time playing with my dog, like something that you really enjoy doing, something that brings you a lot of joy. Find ways to kind of piece it in with the work that you're doing, and just give yourself this kind of quota of, I need to work for this amount of time, or I need to finish this task, or I need to do this amount of things, and then I get this. So if I complete A, I get B. And create these little small chunks of gratification along the way. And so your brain, when it is seeking that kind of short-term gratification and that short-term payoff, it's going to see these little rewards along the path and go, oh, I want to get these. I want to work towards these because these are really easily attainable. It's much easier for you to just do 20 minutes of work and get a reward than it is to sit down and just grind through the whole project. And so as you continue to do this, your brain will kind of make the connection of, oh, this hard work here means this payoff here, and you will feel more and more motivated to keep showing up and keep doing the work that you're needing to do. So the third thing that we can do to help with procrastination, this kind of ties into what we talked about with the lack of structure and planning. And so don't plan abstract chunks of time to work on what you're wanting to work on. And so this creates the problem that we talked about, where there isn't enough structure, there isn't enough concrete timeframes of when you need to do this and this. And so this is kind of the mistake we make. Let's say we have something that we need to work on. Creating an abstract chunk of time can look something like, oh, I'll work on my project this week, or I will submit those papers for work this month. Like something where there is no really concrete set time that you have set aside. It's kind of just up in the air. It's, around this time I'll work on this thing whenever it works out, right? So we're not really creating enough structure about it. And so what happens when we do this, let's say that you have planned to do something this week sometime without creating any more structure than that, what happens is our brains don't really have that signal of, oh, this is the time I need to be working on this. It's just kind of floating around in the back of your mind of this thing that, oh, I need to do it this week sometime. But then we get busy, something else comes up, we get distracted, and before you know it, the whole week's over and you haven't actually tackled this project at all because there was no set time for you to work on it. So what we need to do when we are planning times to work on a project, make it very structured and concrete. So instead of saying I'll work on it sometime this week, say I will work on it Thursday afternoon from 1 to 3, right? Block off that actual chunk of time, go into your planner and actually make it a part of your schedule to work on whatever it is that you're wanting to work on, because then there's no decision making that you need to make around it at that time. You'll get to Thursday at 1 o'clock and you'll look at your schedule and say, oh, this is the time I've allotted to work on this project. Let's work on this project, okay? It eliminates that decision fatigue. It creates the structure that we need. And so it makes this task feel a lot less overwhelming. It's just part of our structured day now. We can just get into it the way that we have planned our day. So the last couple of things that we can do to help with procrastination is to work on reframing our mindset around perfection and failure. So if you remember, the first couple of things that we talked about that drive procrastination are the fear of failure and perfectionism. And both of these things can create a lot of avoidance around completing a certain task because you're either afraid that you're going to fail or you're afraid that you can't make it 100% perfect. And so the topic of failure, we actually did a whole episode on this topic, so if you haven't listened to that already, I would encourage you to go back and listen to that. We go through some tips and strategies to help you kind of reframe your thinking around failure, and that'll be a really big help in you shifting your mindset into how you're going into a project. So what are some things that we can do to help let go of perfectionism and start working towards things a little bit better? First thing we can do in working through perfectionism is to first be mindful of how it's impacting your ability to show up. So striving to be good, striving to do well is a wonderful thing. In some aspects, perfectionism can be a really helpful thing because we all want to do our best. We all want to show up in the best way possible. So be mindful of when that desire for perfection shifts from a functional thing to something that is really impeding your ability to work. So is it driving you and pushing you to be better? Or is it paralyzing you into taking no action at all? And be mindful of where that switch kind of flips and it becomes a really impeding part to the work that you're trying to do versus something productive. So if we are slipping into that territory where that perfectionistic mindset is holding us back from doing the things that we want to do, the first thing that we need to try and lean into in order to alleviate this is to get comfortable making mistakes. So we need to start viewing mistakes, and this kind of goes hand in hand with reframing our mindset around failure and reframing each failure and each hurdle as kind of an opportunity for growth. So if we are able to start reframing our mindset around these mistakes and seeing every mistake that we make along the way as a chance for us to adapt and improve, it becomes much less of a scary thing and it becomes something that is a little bit easier to approach because you know you're going to be better on the other side of it. The other strategy that we can take to help work on procrastination is to get comfortable scrapping your work or scrapping your ideas. And so sometimes we avoid starting a project completely because we don't think that we can do it 100% right the first time around. But if we are able to approach this with a mindset of, okay, I am just going to throw everything that I can at it, and then we can edit and take things out and we can scrap some of these ideas later, it eliminates a little bit of this pressure of needing to be 100% perfect the first time around. So allow yourself the ability to scrap your ideas and the ability to go back and revise what you're doing and just approach what you're doing the first time around as kind of a first draft, because it will eliminate a little bit of this pressure of you needing to hit every single mark the first time around. You can adjust as you go. Okay? So that's what I have for you today. Those are kind of some simple tricks that we can take to try to start eliminating procrastination and making it a little bit easier to approach the tasks that we need to do. All right? And if you're still here, thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next episode.
If you like the show, don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a review, or share the show with a friend. Your support allows this show to reach even more amazing people just like you, and it means the absolute world to me. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll catch you next time at the Mindset Gym.